Hello everyone, and welcome back. My name is Cody of Earth, and today we are starting a brand new survival tutorial series that I am calling the Minecraft Explorer's Guide, where I will be serving as your very own tour guide through the wonderfully complex world of Minecraft. So, all I can say is, I hope you all are ready. Getting started in this game is very exciting, but it can also be a little daunting. Minecraft is, of course, a game of literally limitless possibility, so knowing where to begin and what your goals are going to be once you start in a new world can sometimes feel a little overwhelming. So I want to begin this series by guiding you through the process of setting up a new world in a way that works for you. In a way that really gets you excited to play this game because you know that you've created a world that will be worth investing your time in. Finding that perfect world to begin your adventure is really half the battle, and it can make all the difference if you're able to set up a new world in a way that just feels right. So, let's start from the beginning. Minecraft, for the uninitiated, is a three-dimensional, open-world sandbox game, which really just means that it's a game that gives players a pretty large degree of creativity and control over their gameplay experience. It's a game that doesn't necessarily have any predetermined goals or objectives. The goals in this game are those that you choose to set for yourself, which means that everyone who plays will inevitably have their very own unique experience. Within a Minecraft world, players can explore, gather materials, and fully interact with a dynamically generated environment made up entirely of 1 cubic meter sized blocks, which, with the right tools, we can break and replace wherever we want. And this is what really brings Minecraft to life, because this ability to interact with and modify our surroundings means that we can create nearly anything that we want within it. The sky is quite literally the limit here. And that can be very exciting, or it can be kind of intimidating depending on what kind of player you are. But before we can even begin to think about all that, we need to create a new world first, which we can do by opening up the Minecraft launcher, if we're on a PC. Now, I do want to mention here that there are 2 different versions of the game that you could see yourself playing. There's Minecraft Java Edition, which is exclusive to PC, and can only be accessed through the Minecraft launcher here. That's the version that I'll be playing on. And then there's also Minecraft Bedrock Edition, and this is the version you'll be playing on if you're on a console device like an Xbox, PlayStation, or a Nintendo Switch, or even if you're playing on a mobile device like a phone or a tablet. Although we can choose to play Bedrock Edition here on a PC as well, as long as we're on a computer with Windows 10 or above. And it'll appear right here just below Java Edition within the Minecraft launcher, appearing as Minecraft for Windows. Now, both of these versions are equally considered Minecraft, and for the most part, are very similar to one another. However, there are several subtle differences between the two that will make certain aspects of the game feel a little different. So if you want to learn a little bit more about what those differences are so that you can decide which version to play on if you're new to the game, I'll include a link in the description to a useful article. There are also 2 other popular games that we can play from the Minecraft launcher, Minecraft Dungeons and Minecraft Legends. But those are completely different games that have nothing to do with the base game, so we'll just avoid those for now. Okay, so to launch the game, the first thing we're going to need to do is choose the latest version of the game. At the time of this video, the latest version of the game is version 1.20.1. also known as the Trails and Tales update. And there's a really cool feature here. If we're playing on a PC, from the Minecraft launcher, we can actually choose to play a previous version of the game via the dropdown here. Although by default, only the latest release and the latest snapshot will actually appear here. But if we move up to the Installations tab and select New Installation, then we should be able to select a previous version of the game, going as far back as release 1.0, which was the first official release that came out way back on November 18th, 2011, which is pretty cool. And then once we create that new installation, it'll appear in that dropdown for us to select and then play. But for my purposes, I'm gonna stick to the latest release so that we can have access to all those juicy new features that were just recently added to the game. But before you hit play, you might want to choose a skin for your character first. In Minecraft, a player's skin is the visual graphic here that's used to represent the appearance of our character. So if you're just starting out, then by default, you'll have 9 different player skins over here to the right that you can choose from. But if none of these choices really stand out to you, then you'll also have the ability to select a new skin, where you can then upload a file with your own custom skin design. Now, I won't go into all the details here right now, but there are many ways in which you can either find a skin online or customize your own skin using a skin editor. For now, since this is a tutorial series, I'm just going to start by selecting one of the default skins. And in the future, we're going to come back and revisit this process to come up with our own unique design, which I think is a really important part of the Minecraft experience. I'll be honest though, none of these really look like me in real life, so I'm just going to choose Sunny. I feel like this one really fits the vibe for that early game aesthetic that I'm looking for. It's got those overalls, it kind of looks like he might be a farmer. So yeah, I think this will work really well. And with that, we can now finally press play. And immediately we're introduced to this really nice main menu screen, which has a panorama of one of the surrounding landscapes that we can expect to see in the game. And this will usually change during each major update to represent some of the newest features that were recently added, which is pretty neat. And right off the bat, we have a few options to consider. We can choose to play the game in single player, or we can also choose to play on a multiplayer server. If we choose this option, there will be a quick disclaimer here letting us know that yes, we will be playing online with other people, so we could be exposed to unmoderated content that of course may not be suitable for everyone. Once we've read that, we can proceed, and from here we can join a server if there are any available on our local network. Or we can either directly connect to or add a server if we have that server's address, which will have to have been shared with you by the person who owns that server. Now, there's also this option down here to play Minecraft Realms, which is also a multiplayer experience. It's similar to the other option, but it uses a subscription-based server that's hosted by Mojang itself, the company that develops Minecraft, which gives players the ability to create and manage their own private servers from within the game, without needing to know all that technical stuff that goes into hosting a server online. It is something you have to pay for though, but only if you're the one hosting the server. It also has a bunch of unique features like mini games and pre-made maps that you can choose from, and is really only intended for small groups of 10 players or less. Now, I'm not interested in either of these options because I'm not going to be playing on a server with other people in this series. Instead, we will be playing in a single player world. Now, we do have an options menu that we can explore before creating a new game, but these options will always be available for us to come back to later. So for now, I would just recommend keeping most of these at their default values, unless you have something very specific in mind that you want to change. I personally like to keep my FOV at 80, and then there are a number of things like video and sound related settings that you may want to adjust for performance reasons or if specific sounds are too loud in the game for you. There are also accessibility settings that you can use to help tailor your experience to your specific needs. But for the most part, you're probably going to want to adjust these things as you play, because you're not going to know what needs to be changed until you've played the game. And I'll be sure to cover many of these options as they become relevant throughout the series. So for now, let's go ahead and create our single player world. We can always choose to play in an existing world, that is, if we've already created one, where we can then choose to play the selected world, or we could choose to create a new world. We can begin by giving our world a name, and then we have our first major decision to make here, which is, what game mode do we want to play in? And which of these options we choose is going to be very important for us, because the game mode determines how we will be able to interact with and experience our Minecraft world. In survival mode, our quote-unquote primary goal is to survive. It plays very much like you would expect a video game to play. To make any meaningful progress in the world, you have to explore, gather materials to build and craft items and tools. You have to manage your inventory and even fight off hostile creatures in order to survive. You have things like a health bar and a hunger bar that you have to be very mindful of so that you don't starve to death. If you run out of hearts, then you're dead, whereupon you'll be returned to the spawn point of your world. You even have things like an armor bar to show how well protected you are, and an oxygen bar when you're underwater, which means that you can drown. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. For our purposes, we're going to be playing in a survival world. So the entire point of the series is going to be helping you navigate and explore one of these worlds. Survival mode has always felt to me like the core gameplay experience when it comes to Minecraft as a game, which is why that will be the focus of the series. However, it is not the only way to experience this game. There are other game modes like, for example, Hardcore mode, which essentially plays in the exact same way as a survival world, only the difficulty level is permanently locked to hard, and you only have one life. Which means that if you die, that's it. There's no respawning. In Hardcore mode, when you die, it is permanently game over, and the death screen gives you the option to either spectate the world or return to the main menu, effectively preventing you from ever interacting with that world ever again. This obviously adds a whole new layer of risk that many players really enjoy, so if you're up for the challenge, I'd say go for it. But if we're not up for high stakes Minecraft, we can also play the game in what's known as Creative mode. This mode is pretty much the polar opposite of everything that we can expect from a survival world. In Creative mode, survival is not the priority at all. In fact, here, you are virtually invincible. You don't have to worry about your health, your armor, hunger, or drowning, and you can even fly. Creative mode essentially strips away all of the survival aspects of a Minecraft world and gives you the ability to easily create whatever you want with an unlimited set of resources. You can break and place blocks instantly, you can fly around to get a better perspective of your world, and when you open up your inventory, you'll find an infinite supply of nearly every block and item in the game, even including items that are not available in survival Minecraft, like spawn eggs and command blocks. I've always liked to think of Creative mode as a sort of 3D pixelated AutoCAD software, a virtual world where you can focus solely on designing and creating without having to worry about the burden of all the gameplay elements of survival. And this can be really useful. For example, if you had a large project that you wanted to focus on, and you needed a space to play around with your ideas and your designs, you could come here first to workshop things a little bit before committing yourself to building anything in your survival world. Or you know what, if you don't even want to think about survival, you could just exclusively play in a creative world, keeping all of your focus on building rather than surviving. So if that's more of what you're interested in, you may want to consider playing in creative mode. There are also two lesser known game modes that we actually won't be able to select from this menu. Instead, they'll only be available for us to access in-game, but only if we choose the option down here to allow cheats, which we can turn on. Basically, allowing cheats in your world will give you access to what are known as commands, which we can access by pressing the slash key on our keyboard. If you're not familiar with commands, they're essentially just a way to make some kind of change to your world using what ultimately looks like a bit of code. It's really just a controlled way of making something very specific happen in a way that you otherwise wouldn't be able to do. Trust me, it's a lot less intimidating than it looks. It's actually very user-friendly. We'll probably go through many of these commands at some point in the future, but for our purposes here, one of those commands is known as the game mode command. And it's from here that we can actually change the game mode that we are playing in, just like we were able to do from the main menu, even after we've already created the world. And again, this is because we chose to allow cheats. This otherwise would not be available to us. So to use this command, we first type in game mode, all one word, followed by a space. And then we'll be prompted to enter one of the following arguments, specifying which mode we want to change our game to. And from here, if we look at our options, we'll notice that there are two additional modes that we didn't see before in the main menu: Adventure mode and Spectator mode. Adventure mode plays a lot like survival, only without the ability to break and place blocks. You'll still be able to interact with some elements of your environment, and you'll still have to focus on surviving, but you're not going to be able to modify your surroundings the same way you normally would, which is very useful for creating custom adventure maps. And that's really what this game mode is intended for. For example, you could set up a custom map like an obstacle course in creative mode, and when finished, change the game to adventure mode before sharing it with other players, to prevent other players from destroying blocks that are not meant to be destroyed, or from placing blocks that would otherwise ruin the map. It's a neat little tool, and honestly, most people probably don't even realize it exists. Now, Spectator mode, on the other hand, is a little bit more analogous to a creative world. Here, you can fly freely and you don't have to worry about survival, but you can't interact with the world around you, like at all. You're essentially a ghost. You exist in the world, and you're even invisible to other players and mobs within it, but you cannot interact with the world in any way. That includes blocks, items, entities, everything. You can move freely within it, and you can even move through blocks, giving you a sort of X-ray vision of your surroundings, but all you can do here is observe, or spectate, if you will. Although you do have one really neat ability that you don't get anywhere else, which is that you can actually observe the world through the perspective of other entities by left-clicking on them. So if I left-click on this sea turtle here, I am now viewing the world through the eyes of a turtle. I'm not controlling the turtle, I'm just viewing the world from its perspective. And here's a pretty fun fact. If you enter the point of view of an enderman, a creeper, or a spider, we'll actually get to see a very interesting point of view that these creatures specifically have compared to every other mob in the game. An enderman views the world through inverted colors, creepers view the world through a pixelated green tint, and spiders view the world through this blurred quintuple vision, which is very disorienting. It's a fun little Easter egg, and now you know. So honestly, we can see why these game modes are hidden behind commands, because really they're not meant to be used by the average player. Adventure mode is mostly intended for map makers who want to make player-created maps, and Spectator mode is really just there for those who want the ability to explore their world in a little bit more depth without all the risk. It also happens to be the game mode that your world will automatically be converted to when you die in a hardcore world, so that even though you've lost your one and only life, you still have the ability to go back and observe all the progress you made. Okay, so we will be playing this series in survival, and I get the sense that that's probably what most of you will be playing in as well. I will also be choosing to keep the allow cheats option on, since I would very much like to be able to showcase various commands as they become relevant throughout the series. And really, I've thought about this a lot, and I do think it's probably best to keep this turned on, unless you really just don't want to deal with the temptation of cheating. And this is mostly because there are several commands that you may want to have access to later in the game, specifically game rules, which I'll get to in a bit. But keep in mind, just because you turn this on doesn't mean you have to use them. It just means you'll always have access to them, which I think is important. Alright, so now we need to make a decision about what difficulty we want to play on. And this is probably the first option we've come to where most people watching will likely come to make different decisions. And that's because the difficulty option will have a direct impact on our gameplay experience, with each choice having its own set of challenges for us to deal with in a survival world. So it's really important here to choose a difficulty that's going to be tailored to the experience that you want to have. Now, there are 4 difficulty levels in the game: peaceful, easy, normal, and hard. By default, the game will pre-select the normal difficulty for us to play on, so I'll be referencing this difficulty as the quote-unquote standard from which the others deviate from. So the first and main thing we want to consider is how much damage do we want to take from hostile creatures. On normal difficulty, many of the lower level monsters will deal a standard damage of, on average, about 2 to 4 points. That's equivalent to about 1 to 2 hearts. And this will obviously vary quite a bit as we encounter some of the more challenging monsters. On easy difficulty, these monsters will only deal half of that damage, plus a point. And on hard difficulty, they'll deal approximately 1.5 times that damage. And in some cases, they'll even drop higher value items when they're killed. So, for example, a zombie on normal difficulty will deal 3 points of damage. That's equivalent to 1.5 hearts on our health bar. On easy, that same zombie would deal 2.5 points of damage. And on hard, it would deal 4.5 points of damage. So a few consecutive hits from a zombie in hard difficulty would clearly pose a greater threat than it would in easy. An Enderman, a more challenging creature you may encounter, does a standard damage of 7 points in normal difficulty, 4.5 points in easy, and 10.5 points on hard, which makes these creatures significantly more difficult to deal with on a harder difficulty. On top of this, certain mobs like zombies and skeletons will be more likely to spawn with sets of armor and weapons, and their equipment will have greater chances of being enchanted on higher difficulties. It's also worth noting that specific mobs that normally deliver negative status effects like poison and the wither effect won't have any effect on players if they're playing on easy. On the flip side, if you're playing on hard difficulty, some monsters like the spider will have a chance of spawning with additional abilities like speed, strength, regeneration, and even invisibility. So the difficulty we choose is first and foremost going to make a pretty significant difference on the overall challenge that we're going to face when dealing with hostile creatures. In fact, we even have to consider things like our hunger. On easy difficulty, if our hunger drops to 0, our health will drain, but it will stop draining at 5 hearts of health. On normal, it will stop at 1 point. And if you're playing on hard, it's not going to stop at all. It'll just keep draining until you die of starvation. So really, it all just depends on how much of a challenge you want to have. If you just want to focus on exploration and building, you may lean towards an easy difficulty. Whereas if you enjoy the challenge, you may want to play on hard. But before we make any decisions here, purely on the survival side of things, there are also a number of mechanical differences that we need to consider as well. For example, on hard difficulty, zombies actually have the ability to break down wooden doors, and they can even spawn reinforcements when they're attacked, which could pose a real challenge if you're concerned with the safety of your local villagers. Even more so, and this is going to be a major factor for my own decision making here, whether or not villagers can be killed by a zombie is also affected by the difficulty. So on hard, if a villager is attacked by a zombie, the villager will be converted into a zombie villager, rather than being killed. and this is going to happen 100% of the time. On easy, it's the reverse, where villagers who are attacked will be killed, every time. And on normal, villagers who are attacked will have a 50-50 chance of either turning or being killed. This is going to have some pretty major implications later in the series, for reasons that we'll get to see in a future episode. So for me personally, I will be choosing to play this game with hard difficulty. Because not only do I personally really enjoy the challenge, but I also want to make sure that none of the villagers in my world are ever directly killed by zombies. Now, before I move on, I want to make a case for why you may want to play this game on Peaceful. Unlike the other difficulties, in Peaceful, the vast majority of hostile creatures are not going to spawn, with the exception of a very small handful. And those that do are completely unable to deal any damage. In fact, even if you tried to spawn a monster in creative mode, it would just be removed from the game instantaneously. In Peaceful, you also regain your health bar rapidly over time, making it very difficult to die. And your hunger bar never depletes, which means you can never go hungry. It also means that you can't really eat anything either. This of course has its upsides. It means that you can enjoy all the features of this game without constantly stressing out about your survival, but it also has its downsides, because no hostile creatures means that several items that can only be obtained from these creatures become inaccessible to you. For example, no Endermen means no Ender Pearls, which means you can't activate the End portal. But even with some resources being unavailable in Peaceful, many people still really enjoy playing in this difficulty, because it frees them up to focus on the parts of the game that they enjoy most, without constantly worrying about being killed by a skeleton when all they want to do is focus on gathering resources in peace. If you're not entirely sure which difficulty is right for you, just keep in mind that this can easily be changed later once you've actually started the game. So you don't have to commit to anything right now. You can always choose a normal difficulty to start yourself off, and then switch to another difficulty later. And you'll be able to do this in-game via the game settings. Although you will want to be a little careful when you're doing this, because if you started off a world in normal difficulty, for example, and then you switched over to Peaceful, even just for a brief moment, all of the hostile mobs that are not allowed to spawn here would instantly be removed from the world, which could seriously mess up something that you were working on, so do use with caution. Alright, so we've given our world a name, we've chosen to play in survival mode on hard difficulty, and we've allowed cheats. But we're not done yet. If we move over to the World tab, we'll find even more options that we can use to customize how our world will generate. And this is going to determine how everything within our world will be created. The terrain, the topography of the landscape, the biomes, everything that we will experience when we take our first steps in a Minecraft world. So the first thing we need to consider is the world type, which will help us decide what kind of terrain and biomes that we want to see generating in our world. There are 5 types in total: default, superflat, large biomes, amplified, and single biome. So superflat is probably the most straightforward here. It's a world preset that makes the entire overworld completely flat. There are no hills, no valleys, no mountains or rivers, just flat terrain as far as the eye can see. And by default, the terrain of these worlds generate with 1 layer of bedrock, 2 layers of dirt, and then a layer of grass, with everything generating as one very large plains biome, which also means we'll tend to see lots of villages generating. We will also find lots of slimes generating here as well due to the low altitude of these worlds. And that's because the surface is located at an altitude of -60, which is pretty low considering that the sea level in a default world is at an altitude of +63, putting us 123 blocks above where we're currently standing. This means that in a superflat world where the maximum altitude is about 320, we will have a lot of space to work with along the Y coordinate of our world, if that's something that we're interested in. We can also customize the superflat world, and immediately we can see the default values for each layer that will generate. And if we want to, we can even remove one of these layers if we don't want any layers of that material to generate. But if we go down here to presets, there are plenty of other ways of generating a superflat world as well. Classic Flat is the default preset. Tunneler's Dream adds 230 layers of stone and a bit more dirt, putting us at a much higher altitude in a windswept hills biome, which means no more slime spawning all over the place, but because we're at such a high altitude, it also means that a lot of snow is going to generate everywhere, along with some trees and mobs. This preset is obviously very valuable if you needed lots of room to mine or to build below the surface. A water world will create a flat world full of water that extends 90 blocks below the surface. It also has a few additional layers of gravel, dirt, stone, and deep slate. The overworld preset is pretty similar to Tunneler's Dream, only it has a lot less stone, and it'll put us back in a plains biome. Snowy Kingdom is almost identical to the overworld preset, but adds a layer of snow and puts us in a snowy tundra biome. Bottomless Pit removes the bedrock layer and adds a couple of layers of cobblestone, which means there's no barrier here to prevent us from falling into a bottomless void, hence the name. The Desert preset puts us in a desert biome with several layers of sand and sandstone. Redstone Ready is pretty similar, but consists mostly of sandstone, which is great for those who want to experiment with redstone, given that redstone is pretty easy to see against the lighter colors present in sandstone. And the Void is literally just an endless dimension full of empty space with a single platform so that we have something to begin building on. This could be used to make a skyblock world, to perhaps create some kind of airship build, or maybe even to emulate a space-related build. There's some pretty cool options here. But if none of these presets work exactly the way you want them to, you can also manipulate the syntax for one of the presets to create a superflat world that is better suited to your specific needs. The simplest way to do this is to begin with a preset that has some of the layers that you already want, and then change the number that's already present within the syntax to alter the number of layers for a given material. And that way you can set things up in a way that's a little bit more custom made for you. You can even copy this preset code and save it for later or share it with others, which is pretty cool as well. Superflat worlds offer a great way to create custom spaces for experimentation or for creating customized experiences, but they obviously lack in many of the features that make a survival world worth exploring and playing in long term, because the terrain is flat. A default world, on the other hand, offers everything that we would expect to find in a typical Minecraft universe. In a default world, we can expect to find mountainous terrain and deep valleys, rolling plains and rivers carved out of the landscape. We can find deep caverns that stretch through the earth, rising plateaus that tower over the surrounding plains, and steep cliffs overlooking the water. Here, unlike in a superflat world, we will always find ourselves in a world with an incredibly complex environment, with a wide variety of biomes and structures, flora and fauna, where the shape of the landscape feels endlessly diverse, setting us up for an experience that is ripe for exploration and adventure. And given that this is the quote-unquote default experience that we're meant to have, this is going to be the world type that I will be selecting. But you may also want to choose one of the other similar world types. If you were to play in a large biomes world, you would find yourself in a place that at first glance seems very similar to a default world. However, here, the biomes present in the overworld are roughly 4 times larger along each of the X and Z axes of the world. As a result, a biome in this universe will have an area on the map that is 16 times larger overall than the same biome that would generate in a default world. That means that you would need to travel considerable distances just to find a small handful of different biomes in order to gather various resources, which would make the game substantially more challenging. However, this may be exactly what you're looking for. Perhaps you're looking for that extra challenge and you want an excuse to travel and explore great distances. Or perhaps you have a specific project in mind and you want to make sure that your build is immersed within a specific biome without neighboring biomes breaking that immersion. To go a step further, you even have the option to play in a single biome world, which, as the name implies, is made up of just one biome of your choice. Which means that if you wanted to create a custom experience where your character is meant to survive on a desert planet, similar to something like Tatooine, for example, you could very well make that happen. Although in this specific example, you would be severely limited to only having access to resources found in a desert, which would make surviving incredibly difficult, but this could make for a very interesting experience. A single biome world will default to a plains biome, but you can choose whichever biome that you want from the Customize menu, where a full list of every biome in the game will be made available for you to choose from. You could also play in an amplified world, although this is going to require a pretty beefy computer to pull off. Within an amplified world, the surrounding topography will generate in extreme altitudes. Here, you'll find several large hills and mountains that dwarf any of those found in a default world, and deep caverns often stretch all the way down to bedrock. The terrain here can be very unforgiving and is often extremely difficult to traverse, so this could make for quite the challenge as well in a survival world, but really only if you have the computer to handle it. Alright, so we have default selected for our world type, which effectively tells the game how to generate a world, but it does not tell the game which world to create. In the box below, we can enter what is known as a world seed, and in that box, we can type in a value. That value represents a sort of address that will ultimately determine where our place is going to be within the vast multiverse of Minecraft. Or at least that's how I like to think of it. Essentially, the world seed is a starting value, and what the game does is it takes that value, runs it through a world generation algorithm, and then, using a bunch of calculations behind the scenes, generates a stream of numbers for variables that will effectively determine every single characteristic and feature of that world. Things like the shape of the landscape, where various biomes will generate, or where specific structures will be located, as well as any other elements that need to be generated throughout the world. So the world seed is basically a value that serves as the core foundation for generating every individual Minecraft universe. In practice, what that means is, if we type in a world seed here, let's use a nice round number of, say, 7 million, and then we create a new world. We will find ourselves in a world that looks very much like what we're currently seeing, right? So we're in a snowy taiga, we have a nice little snowy village south of where we spawned, and if we continue south, there's a snowy plains and even a frozen ocean off in the distance. If I then exit this world and choose to create a brand new one using the exact same seed, right away we can see that everything in this world is virtually identical to the previous one I just created. The exact spawn point will vary just a bit, but otherwise, we're back in the same snowy taiga, that village we saw before is in the same location, and off in the distance, there's that frozen ocean. It's kind of like we're in a parallel universe. And that's because the world generation algorithm always outputs the exact same stream of values for a given seed, every single time. So the seed that we use will always generate the exact same terrain, the same structures, the same everything. That also means that if we were to change our seed, even just by a single character, everything about our world is going to change. And as we look around, we can clearly see already that nothing about this world resembles the previous one. It looks like we're in an old growth birch forest, there's a massive ocean off to the east, and it looks like we even have a jungle and a mangrove swamp off to the northwest. We're effectively in a completely different universe. So the world seed is a very powerful feature that gives us a lot of control over our individual experience. And thanks to the nature of how seeds work, this means that the Minecraft community can find and explore thousands of seeds, and then share the ones that have some of the most stunning world generation with the rest of the community. For example, if you wanted to start off in a world surrounded by beautiful mountains and cherry groves, you could search the web for a seed that someone else has already discovered, and it will generate exactly the same for you as it did for the person who discovered it. Or you could search through dozens of random seeds yourself until you find one that offers something that gets you really excited to play in that world. And I should also mention that by default, if you leave the box here blank, the game will actually generate a random seed for you. So if you wanted to, you could load up a world, let the game choose a seed for you, and then play whatever hand you're dealt. And for many people, that's half the fun, especially when you consider the sheer number of possible worlds that exist in this game. In Java Edition, Minecraft uses a 64-bit seed value, so that means that there are 2 to the 64 possible seed combinations, and that comes out to a whopping 18.4 quintillion possible worlds. That number can be quite difficult to wrap your head around, but effectively, if you were to let the game generate a random seed for you, you can basically rest assured that there is absolutely no chance that you would ever experience the same world twice. Here's a fun way of looking at it. If you somehow had the ability to load up a unique world every second, it would take you nearly 585 billion years to see every possible world. I mean, we're talking about a number of worlds here that is, for our purposes, virtually infinite. And it just keeps getting larger and larger as we consider other variables like the world type that we chose, or even the version of the game which updates the world generation algorithm every time a new feature is added to Minecraft. I mean, we really are looking at a multiverse of possible worlds. Okay, so if you want to find a seed that checks all the boxes of what you're looking for in a world, you're probably going to want to take more into consideration than just the area around where you spawn. A Minecraft world is a lot bigger than you might think. In fact, if the number of possible worlds hasn't already overwhelmed your senses, from our spawn point, a Minecraft world stretches for nearly 30 million blocks in each cardinal direction, putting us in a world that has a surface area of 3.6 billion square meters. For reference, the surface area of the Earth is only about 510 million square meters, which means that a single Minecraft world is more than 7 times larger than the entire surface of the Earth. It's so large that just to reach the edge of the world, if you were to walk in a straight line from spawn, unobstructed by terrain, it would take you nearly 2,000 hours to reach the world border. And in reality, it would take you much, much longer than that, because you'd have to traverse all kinds of difficult terrain along the way. You'd have to stop to sleep, gather food so that you don't starve. It would be impossible. So again, for our purposes, we can really think of a Minecraft world as being virtually infinite. And that just further exemplifies just how powerful the world seed is. Each value that we can use here is capable of generating 7 Earths worth of unique terrain. It blows my mind. And of course, most of that terrain will never be seen. So when we choose a seed for our world, what we really need to consider is the space around our spawn point that we can more realistically see ourselves traveling to. And we can do this in a number of ways. We could load up a bunch of random worlds, one at a time, give everything a quick look around to see if it has any of those key features that we like, which could take us several tries, and then when we find one that we like, we can load up a fresh new world in survival using that seed. And that would be the most straightforward way of doing things. And as I mentioned before, through a quick web search, we could also save ourselves quite a bit of time by using a beautiful seed that someone else has already found and shared. Or we could also use an external resource like Chunkbase. This is actually a very useful tool as it allows us to obtain a pretty good view of the world before loading it up. So if we go to the Chunkbase seed map page, we can enter a specific seed here and it'll give us a complete bird's eye view of everything that we could expect to find in a world, with precise coordinates. We can even select what features we want highlighted on the map based on what we're looking for. And we can also zoom in or we can zoom way out to see what the world has to offer for tens of thousands of blocks in any direction. And this can really speed up the process of finding the perfect world seed, because we can essentially just sit here and spam the random button over and over until something stands out to us. And when we stumble upon one that catches our eye, this one kind of looks interesting, it has a bunch of cherry groves right on our doorstep, we can copy and paste that seed into our world generator and see what it looks like. It looks like we're in a Stony Peaks biome, and if we move north, there's that cherry grove we saw on the map. There's even this beautiful village in the valley right next to it. And if we continue northeast, we'll pass some mountains, and then we'll find that little cherry grove plateau that we saw on the map as well. So, with all the cherry groves, lots of hilly terrain, rivers, and several villages nearby, perhaps this is the perfect world seed for you. And if not, we can go back to the world selection menu, delete the world, and try again. It's actually a pretty fun process. Now, I do want to mention that the seed value that we enter doesn't actually have to be a number. Technically, the numerical value for a world seed will always range from roughly -9¼ quintillion to +9¼ quintillion. But we could also enter a word or a phrase here, like frog, or I love goats, or even a combination of letters and numbers like Vault 101. So in a nutshell, if we type anything in this box that isn't within that range, whether it's a larger number or some string of characters, what the game will do is it'll take that value, run it through a hash code function behind the scenes, and then convert it into one of the numbers within that range. So if I use my name for the world seed, Cody of Earth, all lowercase, and create a world, we can check the seed value by using the seed command, and it will show us the seed, which, as we can clearly see, is a numerical value. So that's pretty much it. There's a lot of things to take into consideration when choosing a seed. And really, there's no better feeling than starting a new game in a world that you're in love with from the start. So take your time. Or you can always just let the game choose a seed for you. Whatever floats your goat. The only thing left to do now is decide whether or not we want structures to generate in our world, which I definitely do. And then we can also decide whether or not we want a bonus chest, which is a nice little way to give us a few early game supplies as we start a new world. If we chose to turn this on, we'd find a chest pretty close to where we spawn with 4 torches surrounding it. And within the chest, we'll get a random supply of very basic items to help us survive and gather resources early on. This usually includes some wooden or stone axes and pickaxes, a bit of food like bread, apples, or raw salmon, as well as a few planks, logs, and sticks just to get you started. It's honestly not much, but if you're new to the game, it could help you out a bit while you gain your bearings in a fresh new world. For our purposes, we'll keep this turned off. Finally, there is one additional tab here that has even more options to consider, but we're going to leave most of these alone for now. The most important one here is the Game Rules menu, which includes a ton of customizable options for modifying the rules of the game. These rules give you all kinds of ways to customize your gameplay experience, way too many for me to cover in this video. So what I will likely do is make an entire guide in the future covering all these game rules in detail. But for now, I'm going to leave these alone. But what I do want to point out here is that this is the main reason why I prefer to keep cheats turned on. Because if, and only if, commands are left available to us, we will always have the ability to access every single one of these game rules throughout the game, using the game rule command. And that way, you don't have to feel committed to making any final decisions about these right away. If there's something that you know that you want to change, for example, if you don't want fire to be able to spread and burn things in your world, you could go ahead and turn the Do Fire Tick game rule off. But for me, this series is really meant to be an explorer's guide for the default experience of Minecraft. So for now, I'll be leaving everything as it is. And for these last two options, you really don't need to worry too much about them. The Experiments option gives us the ability to enable experimental features. These are effectively features that are unfinished and still in development, and may potentially be added to the game in the future. But because they're still a work in progress, there's always the chance that enabling them could crash or completely break our world. So for this reason, you really should only enable these features if you're playing in a temporary world that you're not attached to. So obviously, I will be leaving this alone. And data packs are just one additional way for players to further customize their game. Basically, data packs are created by other players who are tech savvy enough to manipulate various files behind the scenes in such a way that fundamentally changes gameplay. These packs can be used to change structures, advancements, crafting recipes, loot tables, you name it, and they can be easily downloaded and installed here. But we will not be messing with any of that. And that's it! Once we have everything set up the way we like, we can finally select Create New World. And while we wait for a brand new universe to generate, we have got so much to look forward to. We've got biomes and structures to explore, tons of flora and fauna, farming and mining, resource gathering and inventory management, crafting, smelting, brewing and enchanting, building with redstone, trading with villagers, archaeology, combat, dimensions and dragons, eating, sleeping, and surviving the wild, and of course, building. And we are going to get into all of that stuff. And as the world around us loads up for the very first time, we can look around in awe, and when we're ready, we can take our very first step. Let's get started.